Hello, how's it going? It's Lee Halliday, and today we are going to be using Recharts to try to build a chart that resembles this one from the Exodus desktop crypto wallet. I really like the way this chart looks, both the color scheme and the way the tooltip works as you hover over. So we're going to try to resemble our area chart as closely as we can to this one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I come out with React, JavaScript, Node videos every week. Hit the like button, all of that good stuff, the bell to get notified. So let's get started trying to recreate this chart. Now I have no clue what library they used to build this one, but area charts is one I've worked with, Recharts is one I've worked with a few times before, and I was able to come up with something that looks fairly similar. Not identical, but pretty close. Now the first thing is that anytime you're charting, you need data. And unfortunately, I don't know of an API that gives me sort of the daily Cardano price like I'm showing in this wallet. So we're just going to invent some data. It doesn't have to be perfect. So we're going to use the good old for, which I haven't used in a while, but it still works well. So we'll just say num is equal to 30, and then num is greater than or equal to 0 with num minus minus. So why this? We're basically going to start 30 days back and then step up until we get to 0 days back, which is today's date. And so for each one of these iterations, we are going to be pushing some data onto this data array. So we want the date, which we'll fill in a sec, and a value. So value, I'm just going to randomize it. We're going to say 1 plus math.random, and that will sort of give us basically 1 exactly plus random's between 0 and 1, so it's going to sort of fluctuate between 1 and 2. And for our date, what we're going to do is basically use the subdays function from datefns to use this 30 days back, 29 days back to give us a date to work with. So the first parameter they need here is a date, so we're just going to say new date, and then we'll pass in the number of days back. So this would just be that. So this gives us a date, which we're going to convert into a string, and then we'll take that string and we will substring off the first part of it. But I'll just show you what it looks like first. So if I save this, go to the browser, this is what we get, basically the past 30 days. It's sort of hard to read right now, so why don't we just make the color white for a sec. There we go. So what I've got is 2021 February 12th and then the time. I don't need the time, so I'm just going to substring the first 10 characters here. So let's go back here and just say substring from 0 to 10. And now we have a string that gives us just the date. And then you can see here the value, so 1.87, 1.65. So that gives us all the numbers down, and it steps up to today's date, which I think, yeah, it's the 14th. So that appears to be working, but we're obviously not going to be showing the data here like a pre. So the first thing we're going to work with is something called the responsive container. So in Recharts, this allows you to not have to define a fixed height and width for your chart. You still have to define one number that's fixed, but we're going to say it's got a width of 100%, and then we'll fix the height to be 400 pixels. So inside of the responsive container is where we're going to put the area chart. So we'll say area chart like this, everything else will go inside. And the only thing we need to pass to this is just the data that we've created. So just like that. So if we come and look at our chart, we've got nothing right now. And the cool thing and sort of why I like Recharts is basically they come in all these like little components. So you add the x-axis component, the y-axis component, the actual area part of the area chart. I like how they split up sort of adding different pieces of functionality using React components. It feels very React-y, even though underneath I believe they're using D3, which is manipulating DOM and HTML and whatnot, but it takes care of all of that for you. So why don't we add the area just like this, and we need to tell it sort of how to access the data that we've given to its parent, the area chart. And so we need to pass in the key, and here we're going to be basically mapping the value just like that. So if we come back here, we have an area chart. It's working. It doesn't look exactly the same yet as the Exodus one. This one looks a lot cooler, but we're going to be working our way towards that. So next up, why don't we add in the x-axis and the y-axis? So we'll do the x first, x-axis, and we need to also tell it what our data key is. So x is along the bottom, so that would be the value that we're showing here. Oh no, that's wrong. This would be each date. So each day is what's represented here. So we'll pass in the date, come back, and now we have the beautiful each date along the bottom here. It's not formatted the same as in Exodus yet. We're Feb 28, but we're going to get there eventually. So now let's add in the y-axis here to the left side of the chart. So we'll go back and we'll say the y-axis, and the data key for that is the value. There we go. So now we have the y-axis here, 0.51, and then up to 2 at the top. So it's starting to look better. That tooltip that shows up, that, like everything else in Recharts, is a component. So we're going to come down here and we are going to say tooltip, and literally all you have to do is that, and you start to get a tooltip, where in our case we're getting the value showing up. Now I think that change to CSS is messing with things a little bit, so I'm going to go back there. So now we can see the date showing up sort of on each one of these. We can see what date and what value, and we can totally customize everything about this tooltip, but we'll get there in a second. Let's just get the functionality working first. Next, if you look at the Exodus one, they've got all these really nice lines. That's what Recharts calls a Cartesian grid. So we'll go here, and that's the last component we're going to be using. So we'll come here and we'll add the Cartesian grid, just like that. Come back, and there we go. So that added the grid here. It's really strong and really like squarey. So we're going to fix all of that. But essentially we have all the pieces in place, and now we can just start to customize everything about the way this looks to get it to look identical, or at least close to the one from Exodus. So why don't we just sort of start, I'll put spacing between these, boom, so it's a little bit nicer. And we're just going to start customizing each one. So the first thing you can customize on the area is the color of the stroke. And the stroke is basically the top line here in the area chart. So we're going to use the color, it's number 2451B7. So how did I get that number? I used this little tool, Color Slurp, to basically try to get that color that shows up here. And it's hard to see right now, but the top line of this is now that color. So with the stroke filled out, we now are going to fill in the gradient part of this area chart. And if you look at theirs, it's got this nice fade from sort of a bit more solid down here to fading out at the bottom. So the way we're going to do that is by actually just defining defs. And I believe this is defining something that normally sits inside of an SVG. And because Recharts is, I think, just working with SVGs, that's why this works. So inside of our defs, we are going to be building a linear gradient. Just like this. And our linear gradient, we need to give it an ID so that we can reference that when we're telling the area sort of which gradient to use. So we'll just give it an ID of color. And then we need to define just some X and Y values for our gradient to work. So we're going to say x1 of 0, a y1 of 0, and then an x2 of 0, and a y2 of 1. And I'm not entirely sure what those four values do, but when I looked at all the examples, it had them. So I'll get it working, and then we'll remove them and just see what it does. But inside of the linear gradient, we have to define stops. So each stop sort of represents a part of the gradient, and as it's transitioning sort of from this stop to this stop, what color and opacity should that stop have, and at what point should it stop? So we are going to say The first one is an offset of 0%, and its stop color is going to be the same as we had down there. So we'll just paste that, and we're going to give it a stop opacity of 0.4. And this will be self-closing just like that. So I'm going to copy it and paste it down here. And this one will go to 75%. And we're basically just going to be playing with the opacity. So we'll say 0.05. So it's almost, you can't see it when it gets to this point. So with our linear gradient defined here in the defs part, we can come down to the area chart again and we can say, go fill the color, what's the fill of this SVG portion, and we're going to say it's a URL that points to the color, the one linear gradient we just defined up here. So if we save this, come back, we're starting to get that fade, and it's starting to resemble more of the Exodus chart from top to bottom. So next thing I want to do is, I'm finding this Cartesian grid really distracting, so we're going to play with it a little bit. So we can go down to our Cartesian grid, and we can say, I'm going to give you an opacity of 0.1 so that you're a little less intense. So it's already looking pretty decent, but Exodus doesn't have the vertical lines here, so we can actually just get rid of those by saying that we want vertical to be false. So you can turn on and off the vertical or the horizontal. And if we go to the browser, it's now sort of looking exactly like the lines that they have in the Exodus one. So next I'm going to sort of work on this, what's this one? This is the Y axis. And what we're going to do here, if we go down to the Y axis, so I'm going to say axis line is false. And the axis line is the line that runs sort of right here between the axis and the chart. So we're going to turn it off completely. And then I want to turn off these little lines as well. So those are called the tick line. So tick line is going to be false as well. And we can also control how many ticks it should have. So we can say we want to have 8 ticks. So that added a few more ticks here than we had before. Sort of up to you how many you think look good. You could say 6 or whatever you want. And the next thing I want to do is format this. Right now it just says 2.1, 1.8, 0.3. But if you look in the Exodus one, it has a $sign with like a formatted number here. So we're going to format that a little bit better. And we can do that by passing in an arrow function that will format the value. So that will be the tick formatter. It's going to be a function that receives the number. And what we can do is return back a $sign and then embed in the number that we're going to turn to fixed to 2 decimal places, just like that. So we go back to the web. We now have this formatting $2.10, $1.80, $1.50, etc. Okay, so why don't we turn our attention now to the bottom here where we've got the date. And if you look at theirs, what they do is basically they have every 7 days showing up. So they have the 7th, the 14th, the 21st, the 28th. So we need to both sort of avoid showing any date that's not divisible by 7. And we need to also format it so it just says Feb 21. So we'll go back to the code, we'll go to our x-axis, and we're going to say axis line is false again. Tick line, tick line is also false. So that gets rid of all those lines there. And then we can come to our code and we'll do the tick formatter again. So this is going to take in a string representation of the date. So I know it's a string because when I created the data here, I converted it to a string and then substringed out just the date part of that. So we're going to come down here to our formatter. And you can do this inline or put it in a function wherever you want. But the first thing I need to do is basically take it from a string into an actual date object. So we'll say date, and we are going to use a function from datefns that's parse ISO. So parse ISO, and we want to parse the string representation of the date. So now what we can do is basically try to check if it's the 7th, 14th, 21, 28th date. So for that, we're going to say date.getDate, which gives us the day of the month. And we can use modulo 7, check if it's equal to 0. So if that's the case, we know that it's one of those divisible by 7 dates. So then we can return a formatted version of that, of the date, and we can pass in what format we want. So the one we're going to use here is MMM, which is the month, like Feb or Mar, and then D for a date, just the day of the month that doesn't have the 0 in front of it. But then we're going to come down here and we're just going to handle for all of the other days of the month, we're going to return an empty string. So when we do that, what we get is something that resembles sort of exactly what they have. Feb 14th, 21, 28, March 7, 14th. Looks like I'm showing a little bit more days than they are, but it's the same idea. So I think last what we have to do is to format this tooltip. And what you can actually do here, so if we go down to tooltip, you can actually pass in an entire component and you can put whatever the heck you want inside of it. So we're going to say content, and we are going to create a custom tooltip, just like that. So we'll come down here below and we'll say function custom tooltip. So what they're going to pass to us are basically 3 props. So those props are whether it's active, because at any point there's sort of only one active and there's 29 others that are inactive. They also give us the payload, sort of what data is being hovered over, and what's the label of that payload. Label being basically the X value, whatever's along the bottom, which in our case is a date, that's a string. Okay, so now inside of here we can basically return HTML that we want to show up. So I'm going to say, if we're on the active one, we're going to return a div with something in it. Else down here at the bottom, we're going to return null because we don't want anything being displayed, only the active one. And I'm going to give this a class name of tooltip. And so why am I doing that? I did set up a little bit of CSS ahead of time that adds border radius, background color, color, padding, shadow, stuff like that. So that should make it look somewhat similar to their version of it. Okay, so inside of this div, what we're going to do is basically show an H4, and this will be showing the label or what date it is. And the label that comes, if we were to just embed it in here, let me just refresh. What did I do wrong? Oh, that is what I did wrong. I have to return something. There we go. So this is that same string representation of the date. It's the same one that we included in the original data up here that we generated. So we need to come and use datefns to basically parse it again, parse ISO, the label, which is the date, and then we're going to format that. And the format we want here is going to be triple E to start with, and triple E gives you the full day. I don't know how they came up with E, but that's what it is. So we're going to do comma to be the day, and then that month again, the triple M. So now we're getting Tuesday to March, and then we'll do comma again, and we'll just put the year. So that gives us the same one that they have. Tuesday, 3 Mar 2021. Wednesday, 3 Mar 2021. Cool. So below that, we are going to put a P. And inside of the P, we are going to basically put the dollar amount. So if we were to just actually JSON.stringify the value of the payload, we'll do null2. No, that's the one, that's the fin. Okay, so what it is basically, it's actually an array, and why it's an array is because you can have multiple areas within an area chart. Maybe you're graphing multiple different values and you're sort of comparing them. We only have one, but it still comes to us as an array. And inside of that array, you have something called the value. So that's what we want to get access to. So we are going to go to our code and we are going to say that we want the payload, the first one, and we want its value. Keep going to the wrong one. So that's 1.6207, etc. So we just want to format that a little bit. We're going to put a $sign ahead of that. We're going to put CAD currency after that. And we're going to say to fixed with 2 decimal places to basically format that correctly. So there we go, 1.93 CAD. So what we've done here is we've basically built a responsive area chart that I think looks pretty great, and it resembles as closely as I could to this one inside of the Exodus crypto wallet. So Recharts library has different components for everything, for pie charts, donut charts, bars, lines, areas. You can combine them in all sorts of different ways. You can like overlay a pie chart over here on the right. But what I like about it is you get full control of everything, first by adding in the different components you want, but then they give you all these props to like basically turn on and off different functionalities, to format different values. Sometimes you're just formatting sort of a string value, but I think for most of these you can pass a component and just full on return the HTML that you want to show up. So again, the ones we worked with were the responsive container, where the area chart sits inside and fills that area responsively. The area chart that receives the data, and then everything that's shown within that area chart. So as an example, no, you know what? I was going to add another value. We could here, value 2, and this would be like 5 or maybe 1 minus math.random. So by default, it wouldn't show up at all, but if you wanted it to show up, you could add another area. And this would be value 2, and you could give it a different color. What's another? A, there we go. So there we just added another one. And you can see that the tooltip is still only showing one of those values. That's because I showed the first one in the array. So if we wanted to show both, we would just come down and maybe add another P that shows the second one, and maybe this is the USD version or something like that. So now we have the Canadian and USD charts. So really easy to pass in sort of multiple data and have it show up here. And that's all I wanted to show today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more charts, let me know, because I was thinking about doing different types like pie charts and donut charts and all of those things. Take care. Hope you have a great day. Bye.